Welcome to a meeting of the Boston Region Metropolitan Planning Organization. Today's meeting is a continuation of a meeting that was recessed from last Thursday. All participants will join the meeting with muted microphones. Please rename yourself to include your first name, last name, and affiliation if you have one. Please do not unmute and mute yourself. To participate in the discussion, please select the raise hand function. Find this by clicking on the participants button at the bottom of the screen, and a window will pop up with a raise hand button at the bottom. The presenters will then call on participants and unmute their microphone. If you're on the phone, you can use *9 to raise your hand. If you have any technical difficulties, please contact Rosine Foley via the chat box or at rfoley@ctps.org or call her at 857-702-3704. This meeting is accessible to people with disabilities. Zoom products are compliant with exceptions with the following standards: Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.1 Level AA standards and revised Section 508 standards. If you require any additional accommodations in order to participate fully in this meeting, please contact Rosine Foley of the MPO staff at rfoley@ctps.org or at 857-702-3704. So as I mentioned earlier, we have one agenda item today. We are in a meeting that is a continuation from our last meeting, which was last week, a week ago, whatever that date was. And the item on the agenda is the final tip programming scenario, Match and Over.
Great, thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning, everyone. As the chair said, and as we all know, we're here today to continue last week's conversation on a final funding scenario for the federal fiscal years 2022 through 2026 Transportation Improvement Program. So I will keep things short and sweet today. Nice change of pace. So I'll focus on refreshing everyone's memory on where we left off last week. I'll start by highlighting the chief goal that we need to accomplish today, followed by a quick review of the written public comments submitted to this board since the last MPO meeting on March 25th. From there, I'll offer a brief reminder of the key decisions that need to be made today before opening things up for discussion. As always, we have several resources posted to the MPO meeting calendar under today's date. So items available for your review include a draft programming scenario table, a copy of the slides from last week's presentation, a packet of the new public comments that we've received over the last 7 days, and then descriptions and additional scoring information for every project seeking TIP funding this year. To set up today's conversation, I want to highlight here at the outset the primary goal that we need to work towards during today's discussion. Our main goal today is to build board consensus on a draft TIP program for this year. Today's discussion is an action item, meaning it needs to end with an MPO vote to approve a draft scenario. This scenario is what will be incorporated into the larger fiscal years 22 through 26 TIP report, which will be released for public review in late April or early May. So now I'd like to take a minute to highlight the public comments that we've received on TIP projects since this board last met on March 25th. As always, the full text of these comments is available on the MPO meeting calendar for your review. So over the last week, we've received 21 written comments on 4 different current and prospective TIP projects, taking these in alphabetical order by municipality, beginning with the Belmont Community Path. MPO staff received 3 comments from residents of Belmont, all of which are in support of the project. This project is being considered for funding this year. So these comments are in addition to the more than 350 comments, both in support of and opposition to the project, that have been reviewed at MPO meetings over the last couple of months. The support letters this week detail a range of benefits the community path will bring, including enhancing safety for students at the adjacent schools, as well as for people walking and biking more generally, supporting recreational opportunities for neighbors, and providing greater multimodal connectivity to local destinations like the town center and public library, as well as regional destinations via the adjoining Fitchburg Cutoff Path. Collectively, the letters request funding for this project as soon as is feasible. Next, we received 1 letter of support for Everett's Transportation Management Association project, which is being considered for funding this year. This letter comes from Vineet Gupta, the Director of Policy and Planning at the Boston Transportation Department. Mr. Gupta notes the City of Boston is currently revising its transportation demand management requirements, and that the formation of a TMA in Everett will help support this work by seeding broader TMA efforts throughout the lower Mystic region, including in Boston neighborhoods, Charlestown, and East Boston. The letter highlights that these efforts will help the city meet its trip reduction and air quality goals for these neighborhoods. We also received a letter of support for project number 606130, intersection improvements at Route 1A and Prospect Street in Norwood. Mark Ryan, the town's Director of Public Works and Town Engineer, notes the town's disappointment with the project being delayed from its current 2022 advertisement date. The letter requests that the MPO retain funding for this project in fiscal 2023, as is currently shown in today's materials, as it will be on track to begin construction at that time. And finally, we received 3 letters of support and 13 letters of opposition to the Swampscott Rail Trail. These letters come on top of the 15 letters, both supporting and opposing the project, that have been presented over the last 3 MPO meetings. The support letters come from Swampscott Town Administrator Sean Fitzgerald, Christine Keeney of the East Coast Greenway Alliance, and Swampscott resident Francis Weiner. The letters highlight the many benefits the project will provide, including increased access to safe off-road recreation opportunities and the creation of new connections across Swampscott and the region more broadly. These connections include the project's role as a key component of the rail trail system that is envisioned to connect municipalities from the New Hampshire border to the city of Boston. The letters highlight that some segments of this trail have already been completed, with these sections seeing heavy use since they were finished last year. The letter submitted by Town Administrator Fitzgerald responds to questions raised last week by this board about the support for the project from the town. The letter notes that a town meeting vote in May of 2017 endorsed moving forward with the project by a margin of 210 to 56. This effort was unanimously supported by the Select Board and by 6 other town boards and committees. A June 2017 town-wide vote further demonstrated support for this effort by a 12-point margin. In opposition are 13 letters from Swampscott residents. Collectively, the letters state the lack of support for the project from many abutters as well as from others across the town. The letters argue that the town has not been forthcoming about the need for land takings as part of the project, and that abutters have not been offered appropriate compensation for these takings. The concerns about land ownership and use include questions surrounding the impact of the project on the existing overhead power lines along the path's route, with one letter attaching a news article and a memo detailing potential conflicts between the proposed path and these utilities. Many letters also express concerns about the environmental impacts of the project, including through the removal of trees. For this reason, 2 letters attached a copy of a Salem News article from March 24th of this year, arguing that the project works against the region's climate goals by removing these trees. Some letters also argue that the project is not an appropriate use of town resources at a time when funding for many other local priorities is needed.
Hey,
so that wraps up
Matt, hold on a second. You and I got an email at 7:33 last night from Cindy Taylor opposing the Belmont path, and I don't think you included it in your summary today. And I just want to make sure everybody knows we did get a letter in opposition to the Belmont path last night.
Okay, thank you. My apologies for missing that one.
No worries, go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so that wraps up the comments that we've received in the last week. So let's dive into a quick rundown of the work before us today. As a reminder, the scenario that we're discussing today does not yet include funding for any new projects, although we've actually just posted an updated scenario. So if you've reviewed the scenario that was posted earlier this week, please review the current one that's posted, as that will facilitate today's discussion. So there are 4 key decisions that are embedded in this scenario and that need to be made today before we can arrive at a final draft scenario. So as things stand now, there are funding surpluses in the first 2 years of the forthcoming TIP, which is 2022 and 2023. Today's conversation will need to consider options for addressing those surpluses, which we'll get to in just a minute. This board will also need to arrive at a decision about whether or not it would like to allocate any of its remaining funding in fiscal 2026 to new projects in this TIP cycle. And finally, this board will need to decide which community connections projects it would like to select for funding from the 17 projects currently being considered. And with that, I'll stop there and turn it back over to the chair to begin a discussion.
Thank you, Matt. So as Matt mentioned, there is a new proposal, a new scenario. 100% disclosure, it is certainly not staff's fault that the scenario did not get posted earlier. It is a proposal from MassDOT that we finalized late last night. Matt, can you go through the next slide on your agenda? I think it's the next 2 slides, maybe.
Yeah.
The one that, there you go. Thanks, Matt. So we are proposing today that we make some changes to the scenario 5. The first issue for us is, as we talked about, I think it was 3 or 4 weeks ago now, we are not comfortable including $27.1 million in GLX funding in 2021 as a program today. I don't know if everybody knows this, but we just got $103 million for the Green Line project in the $1.9 billion stimulus bill. So that, along with some project management issues, make us want to take a pause for a second and not transfer the entire $27.1 million in GLX funding this year to the project. Project is on schedule. Project is doing really well. None of this is anything other than we want to make sure we're not taking money from the MPO for the project that we don't need. So we're proposing shifting this funding from 21 into 22. That, of course, opens up a gap in 21. We would fill that gap first by shifting the $12.6 million in Ferry Street funding that is currently programmed in 22 into 21, make a few minor adjustments to the cash flows of the Sumner Tunnel, and then fund a new project. We're recommending the MPO, consistent with your request that we look at MBTA projects, that we fund the Columbus Avenue bus lane. It is a $14.8 million project. And after I get through the scenario adjustment and take questions, Jillian Linnell will have a slide that will tell you exactly what the Columbus Avenue bus lane project is. Then the final changes we're making is we are adjusting the Rutherford Avenue cash flows in order to maximize the amount of money available in FY26. So basically, by adjusting the cash flows, we're able to shift $6.5 million of surplus in 23 into 26, which will leave the MPO with $20.3 million to program in 26 for new projects. Are there questions? Brian King.
On mute. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's great to come back from recess. Like I said, last week is always my favorite subject. Thank you for this. This makes a lot of sense to me. I understand that the stimulus money is metaphorical manna from heaven at this time of Passover and Easter. That makes a lot of sense. And, you know, for that reason, it was unexpected, but it is a windfall. And so I think the plan that you just described makes a lot of sense. It keeps the MPO's money in the MBTA, which, as we all know, needs it. It keeps the money in the inner core, which is good for regional balance. And most importantly, to my mind, it helps projects that move people on transit along dedicated rights of way, which is something I think we all want to see more of. So I want to thank you and your staff and the CTPS team for probably working late into the night on this last night, and I look forward to supporting it. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Leonard Diggins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I have a question, and maybe this will be through to you, to Mr. Kane. So monies that are going to the MBTA from this stimulus legislation, will that all be for operating, or would the MBTA be able to use some of that money for things like the Columbus Ave bus lanes project?
So I'll actually answer some part of this question then. So there are several different pots of money in the stimulus bill that are coming to transit systems, including the MBTA. There is one pot of money that is specifically dedicated to the Green Line Extension project. That's $103 million. Can't be spent on anything else. It is specifically for the Green Line Extension project. There's a whole larger pot of money that I believe, and Jillian or Brian can jump in if you need more information than that, but there's a bigger pot of money that I believe is available to do either operating or capital, and the T is currently considering adding back some of the bus projects, bus routes that were taken away during the Forging Ahead process. Okay, the 14.8 million for Columbus is not T money. It's highway money being reprogrammed for T purposes under our proposal.
Yeah, I understand that. It's more so a matter of whether the T would have the financial resources to do something like this. I mean, that came from a source other than the MPO's money. So just really trying to make sure that we can do as much as we can for projects beyond the MBTA. As much as I'm a fan of MBTA, it's more that if the MBTA is getting a lot of some monies from other sources that it can use, then we could use the monies, the very limited funds that the MPO has for other projects. So just trying to figure that out. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah. Well, you're welcome. I should also note that there is not, if we had a highway project ready to fill this $14.8 million gap in 2021, we would have brought it to the MPO and proposed either it or proposed them both as a possibility. We do not have a highway project to fill this gap, which is one of the reasons 2 weeks ago, Brian, I think it was 2 weeks ago, Brian suggested that we look to the T to see if they could fill the gap. Jillian?
Yeah, I just wanted to reiterate with the most recent round of stimulus, the American Recovery and Reinvestment, whichever the most recent one is, we still have not gotten the guidance from the feds regarding what we can and cannot use those funds for. The initial webinar detailing some of that is actually scheduled for Friday of this week. So we're still very much in the development stages of what we can and plan to use those funds for. There was a bit of a discussion that was had at Monday's FMCB meeting about some of the ideas of how it could be applied, but nothing has been finalized yet, as we're still very much waiting for more extensive guidance from the federal government regarding that funding source.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Linnell, and I appreciate your reminder of the situation that we had regarding the lack of a transportation, highway project, from the last meeting. Thank you.
You're welcome. Other questions or comments? Daniel Amstutz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, I would like to know more about the Columbus Ave bus lane. I think I appreciate that with the stimulus bill and sort of new money coming in, things are rapidly changing. But I don't know how many MPO members know very much about that project, or even that it's seemingly ready for construction this year. One question about the GLX funding: if there is a substantial amount coming in from the stimulus towards that project, is it feasible that the 27 million that is being moved to next fiscal year, would that still be needed, or is that's probably very much under review, but would that funding yes, basically, would there be another surplus next year potentially if this funding from the stimulus sort of covers the rest of the project cost?
So yeah, yes, that's an excellent question. There's a possibility that given the additional stimulus money and the excellent project management that is going on with the Green Line, that we will come to you next year and say we actually don't need the $27.1 million. We are not at that position today. Nobody should think we are, but there is certainly, yes, Daniel, the possibility that when we're developing a TIP next year, we might be coming to you and saying, we actually don't need the final tranche of money, and it is the MPO's prerogative to program it as it sees fit at that time. We just don't know that yet.
Okay,
now,
thank you. Thank you.
Yep. Now, does everybody, so at some point I am going to give it over to Jillian to talk about the bus lane and its benefits and what it is, but we'll take questions until we're done questions on the scenario, and then we'll have Jillian talk about the bus lane. David Kozis?
Okay, thank you. This scenario seems like a very good option to me. I think the bus lanes, seem to fit within all of our, all of our goals, and I'm looking forward to hearing more about it from Jillian. We talk about costs a lot lately and cost increases. And I mean, my bet is that the $14.8 million is not the full cost and maybe not even the final cost. I'm not sure, but are we saying that this is the $14.8 million that the MPO will be contributing and that's it, not anything more later on? Thank you.
So yes, so the 14.8 is the T's best estimate of the total construction cost. And as with all of our costs that we show, this is 14.8 total. So it's really I think it's roughly $11.8 million, $11.9 million of federal funds, and then a match that will be provided by the T. So to the extent that the project costs more than 14.8, the T's match will go up, but the MPO's contribution will be set, because this is all going to happen this year, and there is no more time for the MPO to amend it or for federal transit to actually, for FTA to actually process any additional transfers. So yes, this will set the bar for how much the MPO can and will contribute to Columbus Ave.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Daniel, do you have another question?
Sorry, not at the moment. I don't know why my hand's still up.
Okay. Jillian, do you have something you want to add? Or your hand is down, that's okay. Other questions before we turn it over to Jillian to talk about the benefits of the Columbus Avenue bus project? Seeing none. Jillian, you want to, Matt, put up the slide so Jillian can talk to the slide, and then somebody unmute Jillian so she can talk.
Thank you. All right, we put together this very brief slide just to give everyone an understanding of what exactly the Columbus Ave North bus lane project is and where it is in regards to the current Columbus Ave bus lane that is in construction. So this will be a continuation of a center running bus lane along Columbus Ave in Boston between Center Street, Ritchie Street, and Malcolm X, and along Triamount between Malcolm X and Ruggles. The current cost estimate does include related infrastructure, potentially including boarding platforms, canopies, customer amenities, sidewalk improvements, and TSP. The benefits for this project obviously would help reduce passenger delays due to congestion, given that it would be a dedicated busway for our vehicles. It has the potential to add additional bus service along the corridor without additional hires. It would obviously enhance our connections to rapid transit and commuter rail, and hopefully reduce crowding by increasing our bus system capacity. As David mentioned, the 14.8 is the total project cost at this point, with the 20% match coming from the MBTA. We are currently in the early stages of design and are prepared to be going out for bid for construction by the fall timeframe. Wes from the MBTA is also on the call right now, or on the meeting, and he can speak to any other specific project questions or details that folks may have.
Thank you, Jillian. Questions? Bill Monty.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Jillian. So again, this is a really exciting project. Fully support this. I guess I just want to clarify. I know there's an ongoing project on Columbus Ave today. So this is actually an extension of that further north. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Got it. Thanks.
Tom Katzis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Jillian, for the presentation. Given the fact that the city of Boston thinks this is a great project and it'd be 100% behind it, we've been collaborating with the T, along with other municipalities in the region on improving bus service. And there was a mention about the project, that this will be an extension of an existing project that we're working with on the T. And one of the things about that project is it was, as far as compared to typical TIP projects, or not TIP project, construction projects, it was really quick. It was down and dirty, and it gives you a lot of high confidence that the T and the city and everybody involved can meet the deadlines. This corridor it's got 30,000 people a day riding on a bus, I'm sorry. Going to various places. One big connection is perhaps one of the most important job centers in New England, the Longwood medical area. There's a lot of environmental justice, population, and benefits that would derive from this. And in light of the unfortunate circumstances as far as readiness of roadway projects, I don't know if we're going to get anything, Mr. Chair, fellow members, that would give the bang for the buck for this. I appreciate the opportunity to comment, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Tom. Jim Fitzgerald.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just following up and supporting, what Tom had said and Jillian. And it's really building on the momentum of the current segment that's under construction. And actually this segment is actually, as far as a design perspective, is actually easier than the existing project that's been very successful and has gone very smoothly. So we think this is an extension of that great momentum in that project, and a little bit easier from a design perspective, and actually has more bus service that utilizes this segment of the corridor. So I think it's just a great project. And obviously, I think, as Jillian said, it connects, many, many buses up to Ruggles, which is a major bus hub for us. It's a great project. We also have our planned Nubian process going on that DPDA is leading. And we're looking at, hopefully, finally, within this exact corridor, getting the P3 site developed, which some folks may be aware of. It's a very large site that the community's been really hoping to redevelop into, some positive mixed use development there. So we have that process going on as well. So this kind of, these transit improvements would be a fantastic improvement for, the planned Nubian work that we're doing, and specifically the P3 project. So just wanted to lend my support and give that context.
Thank you, Jim. Eric Barassa.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, this sounds like a great project. We've been big supporters of more dedicated bus space, bus priority, in the inner core. There's been a tremendous sort of community engagement process with the Columbus Ave project. This extension north gets more into institutional land uses and away from sort of residential land uses. And it's a wide corridor. It's 3 travel lanes in each direction. This makes, this sounds like a great project, and MAPC is very supportive.
Thank you, Eric. Other questions or comments? David Kozis.
So I'm not familiar with this project yet, but I am very familiar with a similar sort of project with a center running bus lane in Cleveland, where I grew up. And that project was very, very prominent. It was very well done. It's, ends up that you have really, it's comfortable for the customers there. They have nice stations up and down the corridor. And so this slide says that it says potentially including boarding platforms and canopies. So I guess my question is, if we don't have canopies, at the beginning, like now, as it's being constructed, is there room to improve it later on and add additional amenities so that we can create something even better?
Wes or Jillian, you want to handle that one?
Yep, there you go. Sorry, just get myself unmuted. So for those who don't know me, Wes Edwards, Assistant General Manager of Service Development at the MBTA. So yes, on the Columbus Avenue project that's currently under construction, we will have large canopies, center running platforms. We're actually looking to recreate that similar environment on that sort of northern extension going up towards Ruffalo Station. The reason I think it says potential is really because there's a little bit more design work that we need to do out there. So barring any unforeseen limitation, we do plan to have canopies. We do plan to have center running platforms in that area. It would only be if we find that there's some sort of utility limitation that would prevent that. But we would ideally like to, we've even looked at opportunities to like relocate platforms to make sure that we do have platforms and shelters and other canopies on the existing service. So I would anticipate that it would have canopies, platforms as part of the construction once it opens.
Thank you, Wes. Tom Bent.
Thank you, David. Yeah, this sounds like an excellent project. I was just wondering, because it's the first time we've seen it, has this been scored?
Matt Genova.
It is not. So this is, yeah, sort of a late entrant to the conversation.
Okay, and where was it in the LRTP, or where was this project? I'm blanking out on it a little bit.
Right. So this project, I don't believe, is in either the LRTP or the plan and as Matt said, hasn't been scored, but it is consistent with. So CTPS did for OTP 2 years ago, maybe 3 years ago now, an analysis of priority corridor bus lane projects in the region. And then the FMCB basically charged Wes and his team with getting them developed and in the ground. And this is, I think, probably the second or third or fourth, Wes would know, of those lines, those bus lanes that we're actually implementing. So it's part of a longer term planning process that has actually involved the MPO at the beginning and is now bearing fruit with, if the MPO is agreeing, giving us some money today to get another one in the ground.
Thank you, David. That helps. But yeah, it looks like a great project, so we would be supporting it.
Thank you, Tom. Lynn Diggins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Actually, Mr. Bent was getting at something that I was wondering about too. So I understand that it wasn't scored. That's fine. Might it be possible to get it scored at some point, because it'd be good to have some basis of comparing it to other potential projects like this, and I support it. I understand the need for us to move quickly, but it'll be really good in the future to have some basis of comparison. So that's a request, and the second short question, because I had to pop out briefly at the beginning of Ms. Lau's presentation. Would this be considered the gold standard of BRT, or is it just like a notch below that?
So again, sorry, go ahead.
No, you go, Wes. That's good. I'm glad you jumped in.
So gold standard is kind of use a different measurement for measuring gold standard. Gold standard is something that's developed by ITDP that includes fleet, offboard fare payment, other things like that. But this does have certain elements that are alignment with what ITDP standards are for at least speeding up the frequency and reliability of bus service. So you can't really use the bronze, silver, gold standard for measuring this type of facility without kind of a lot of other elements related to like fleet and fare payment as well.
Gotcha. Thank you very much.
Brian King.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was just going to offer to make a motion if there was language that you thought would meet the requirements, but I leave that up to you.
Yeah, we still have a few more things to discuss, because at some point we're going to need to talk about community connections and about what to do with the additional funding we've now parked in 26. But yeah, at some point, Brian, I will come back to you for, I'm going to need a motion to put an amendment on the street today, hopefully, because I've got to meet, if we're going to do this, we've got to get it done in time for FTA to accomplish the transfer of highway funds. And their books are closing, their books close quicker than FHWA. So we might be wanting an amendment today to get this on the street, as well as instruct staff to prepare it for the tip, but we're not ready yet. Daniel?
Hi. Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I think this is really interesting. Good project. I'm glad I was hearing from City of Boston, everything all behind it. That sounds really good. I mean, I used to live on Center Street several years ago in this area, so I know Columbus Avenue is a pretty wide street, challenging for pedestrians to cross. I'm just curious. I'm curious about the bigger picture. I think this might have been mentioned at the presentation or when this was talked about a few minutes ago, but is this connecting to a different project that's like south on Columbus Avenue or north on Tremont Street? And I guess I was sort of going to ask a similar question to Len's about BRT, not gold standard, but I'm wondering if this is like close or closer to BRT, like the larger project that the city is working on for Columbus or a larger network.
Wes, can you answer that?
Yeah, so I'm happy to. So Dan, yes, this is connecting to another project that we've been doing. We are constructing and actually hoping to open this summer on Columbus Ave. That current project runs from Walnut Street on Columbus Ave up to the Jackson Square, right around the Jackson Square Orange Line station. It is center running bus lanes. There's about 4 center running platforms along that corridor. Because kind of like taking one step back, about a year ago, there was a number of projects that we accelerated for bus priority related to sort of the rapid response related to the pandemic. This was a corridor where we saw high ridership on the bus network specifically. So we realized, since we were already in planning and concept for this, we accelerated the construction of that project. That's why we were able to deliver such a sort of high impact project within about an 18-month period. With that, though, we also did with City of Boston's help, a robust public engagement process this entire time. So that actually kind of gave us the framework to talk about, can we extend this further north, knowing that the community has been very supportive. We've been engaged in the community regularly. We have updated construction costs. So there's a lot of kind of like things that we've done to lay the groundwork to move this quickly. So there's also kind of just a framework for why I think this project is sort of on everyone's radar very suddenly, is that because of the pandemic, we accelerated this project and we realized we can continue to extend it. To the question about BRT and sort of how does this now fit in with sort of BRT. So center running is one of the elements that organizations like ITDB identify as sort of a higher quality BRT element. But the way they do their score sheets, they have a score sheet of a number of different elements, and then they can determine whether something meets sort of a bronze, a silver, or gold standard. But this is the first center running bus lane facility in the state of Massachusetts that will be opening this summer. And the project we're talking about today is continuing to extend that. It also aligns with Go Boston 2030's goals for doing bus priority in this corridor as well. So it's kind of like there's a confluence of a lot of planning priorities sort of aligning with this project. And so that's why we wanted to bring it forward today, to sort of ask you to help fund this project and move it forward quickly.
All right, thanks, Wes.
Thanks, Wes. Other questions? Okay, Matt, so now go back to the previous slide, I think. So all of this was based off of scenario 5. So if everybody remembers, scenario 5 allocated $2 million to the Community Connections program, and we were ultimately going to have a discussion about whether we wanted to fund more than $2 million. We built our scenario off of scenario 5, so our scenario currently assumes the $2 million funding total for Community Connections. That's not a policy decision we made, that's just we were starting with that, and the MPO hadn't made a decision about which, if any, of the Community Connection projects they would want to fund. So we now need to have a discussion about Community Connections, because if we're going to fund more than $2 million, we're going to have to figure out a way to accommodate that within these cash flows that we've developed for this project. So Matt, do we have something on Community Connections we can talk about?
We do, yeah. I can. Well, thank you, Kate. Just gonna move ahead a couple slides. Yeah, so we, based on the scenario that we've just discussed, staff look back at the Community Connections projects that have applied for funding this year and said sort of, what makes the most sense with, with the funds we have available. So, right now, the scenario that's posted that includes the Columbus Avenue project has about $45,000 left over in funds for the total year in 2022. And so that would be the $2 million for community connections and then that 45,000. And so this scenario here for community connections does a couple of things, which I can highlight in a minute, but the overall picture here is that you can see at the bottom in the total funding proposed line, we are just $2,625 over our $2 million budget, which we have enough to cover because we still have that 45,000 in remaining funds in the total picture for fiscal 2022. And you can see here, there are up at the top above the bold line are the 4 projects remaining that were a part of the applications in the pilot round that we did last year for the Community Connections Program. And so, at that time, the way we decided to move forward at that time was, programming projects in fiscal 2021, the first year of the pilot rounds. We ended up only using roughly $900,000 of those funds and then reallocated the other portion of the $2 million to other projects last year. And so, these 4 projects are carried forward from that because they weren't quite ready for 2021 funding, but are now ready for 2022 funding, with the exception of Newton, which we heard about last week. So that project is actually 2022 would be its second year of funding. So basically, what this scenario allows us to do is to sort of close out the pilot round of this program and then consider other new applicants for this year. And so, just one more, okay. And so some of the benefits of doing this recommendation are that, again, we stay right at our sort of $2 million allocation for the program in fiscal 2022. And what the scenario recommends is that we focus the funding on the new projects on capital projects. And so you'll remember sort of, the conversations we've had on the Community Connections Program in the past. We can fund both capital and operations projects. Operations projects could carry anywhere from a 1 to 3 year timeline. Regulations around CMAQ funds, which are the funds that we use for this program, can support operations for up to 3 years. And so those operations projects can carry sort of a longer commitment timeline. And so by focusing in this case on the capital projects, we are able to fund almost all the capital projects that have applied anew this year. In addition, like I said, the pilot projects that applied last year. And so it gets us to funding 10 of the 17 projects that are in the mix. So more than half, which we think is is a pretty good outcome here. Again, we advance all the pilot round projects, but really by focusing on our funding this year on the capital projects, we do preserve some funding flexibility in future fiscal years because we're not committing a ton of funding in fiscals 2023 and 2024 to what would be years 2 and 3 of operating projects. And that really allows us, this last bullet point here, which is sort of the most important takeaway here, is that even though last year was the formal pilots, we're just in year 2 of this program, and I think there's still some questions about how the program works as a whole and sort of what types of projects are sustainable for funding. And so really what this focusing on the capital projects this year allows us to continue to evaluate the one ongoing operating project in Newton, and then we would add the new Royal Street project in Canton, which is the other pilot rounds operating project. And so this essentially just sort of gives us more time to say, can those projects move forward successfully, and can they show an air quality benefit after their first year of operations, which is required for any project to receive its second or third year of funding. And so right now, due to issues surrounding the pandemic, the one operations project that we funded in Newton hasn't gotten off the ground yet, and so we don't have sort of full data on what that looks like. And so I think this approach sort of balances a couple of goals, which again is sort of preserving a little bit of flexibility in our funding over the next couple of years, funding sort of a higher number of projects or as high a number as possible within our $2 million goal, and then giving us more time to evaluate the success of operations projects, so things like shuttles, before committing to several more of those. And so that is the staff recommendation. I can go back to Cool. Can go back to this. So that is the starting point. I'm happy to take questions on this, or just sort of open it up for a larger discussion on how we approach this. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Matt. Eric?
Thank you, David. Thank you, Matt. I think this approach makes a lot of sense. I'm my sort of theme for this tip cycle right now is trying to preserve maximum flexibility. I think it would be good for us to do that and then have this conversation about our policy for projects that go up in cost. This is also how I'm thinking about the 2026 federal fiscal year programming as well, about maybe just keeping that funding there unprogrammed to have that policy conversation. So I think that this approach here makes a lot of sense to me. And so I just wanted to make that point, and I'm supportive of it.
Thank you, Eric. Lynn?
I agree with everything that Eric has said. So the question is, what more do I say? So I do have a question though regarding the overruns. So there hasn't been any overruns on the capital projects so far, right, Matt?
Yeah, so that's sort of one of the benefits of the Community Connections program is that these are sort of like defined contribution, amounts from the MPO, and so so we haven't seen any additional costs for these projects. Sort of, what the MPO allocates is what these projects get.
Great. And so, I guess this is to the chair. So we are locked into the 2 million per year as a decision by this board. We have the ability to increase that if we want, right? Yes.
The board always has the ability to either increase or decrease. I don't think we want to decrease, frankly, but we always have that ability.
Right.
It's just a matter of priorities. If community connections they end up being a higher priority, and we want to give more money because they're doing really well, yes, we can give them more money.
Right. And at the risk of upsetting my colleagues on the Right Oversight Committee, I like this all except for the wayfinding at Alewife, because once again, I would like to see either this be part of transit modernization, because I see that we have 5 million being associated with that being in the tip, or that the MBT takes this on with I understand we don't really know how the stimulus money can be spent, but I'd rather hold off and see, if maybe this can be pulled into some other program, other than the community connections, because there is so little money in it, and I want to see more go towards things that can't find funding some other way. Thank you.
Jay Monty.
So thank you, Matt. Just a couple of questions. So, last year we came into this and a lot of folks had submitted capital projects, and then the message we got back was, well, capital projects really aren't an easy thing to manage through this process. So a lot of folks got kind of turned away at the last minute, or that's how it felt, I guess, to some folks. And now we seem to have kind of turned around and said, well, actually, no, this year we're going to fund primarily capital projects. And I'm trying to understand kind of, was it something about these capital projects? I mean, they're all good projects. I'm not trying to criticize anybody's project, but I'm sending some mixed messages here about what, the type of projects that would be sort of like, a good pick for this program. We seem to be going back and forth a little bit. That's question number one. And question number two, I guess if we could just see all the projects that applied and understand which ones we're turning down for this year, I think would be helpful as well.
Yeah, so Matt, I will take a cut at the first question, and you can also jump in. So I believe what was discussed last year was not to fund small capital projects that would have to go through the MassDOT project management system, in the sense that system is somewhat bulky and difficult to manage for smaller projects. So these are all projects like the blue bikes and the bike racks and the transit app. Those are all projects that will be managed out of my office, and we will manage them as a contract with a vendor. And so it's not file a 25% design, have a public hearing, file a 75% design, file 100% design, take whatever time that process takes. The only one on here that I'm not sure of is TSP. I'm not sure whether that'll be a MassDOT project or whether that's an MBTA project or how that is actually going to be implemented. But all the other ones are projects that will be managed basically out of my shop. Matt, do you have anything else to add before you can talk about this slide?
Yeah, I think Sandy Johnson may also have some things to add, but I'll just begin by saying, like overall, really what the last year has done is just given us an opportunity to, sort of push and pull on the program a little bit and see what works. And so I think, our assessment of the program last year was sort of our assessment at that time, but I think we've had, another 12 months to sort of understand how these projects work. And to the chair's point, just understand sort of, how these projects are administered, which is obviously important. Projects need to be administered to be successful and to get in the ground. So yeah, so I think that's part of the reason why, our understanding has shifted a little bit. But I'll also, defer to Sandy if he has more to add to that.
Sandy?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair, and thanks, Matt. I think the chair and Matt basically covered the gist of it, which is that we're still actively figuring out what is feasible and what works with this program and what does not create an undue administrative burden on MassDOT and on OTP in particular and on the MBTA for certain projects. So yeah, it's a period of experimentation and I think kind of a long-lasting pilot, but I think we're finding out at this point what does work and what doesn't. And we've been fortunate to partner with MAPC and point people in the direction of their collective purchasing process for a few items. And that helps out as well. So hopefully we'll be expanding that partnership in future years. I also just wanted to address Len's question about the Alewife project. So that's at the MBTA station, but the project sponsor is 128 Business Council. It will be, the project would be managed by MBTA because we cannot give a grant directly to a transportation management association. But this is not the beneficiary of the project are the riders on the 128 BC shuttles. This is not something that the MBTA would be spending their own money on. So from staff's perspective, at least, there is not actually another funding source available for that project at this particular time.
Thank you, Sandy. Jay?
Thanks, guys. So I guess back to my second question, just wanting to just understand what we are funding in addition to what we are funding under this proposal.
Okay.
Yeah, so the projects you see here, this is the full list of new applicants. So as I said, the proposal moves forward with, let's see, moves forward with these 4 projects, which are the returning projects from the pilot round, and then takes on several of the projects on this list. And I'm happy to go back to the full list, but it's basically the projects that we aren't funding on this list are mostly the shuttle projects. So any of the operating projects. So blue bikes, transit signal priority, transit app education, bike racks, and parking management would all be funded. And I should note we're only, within our funding constraints, only proposing one of the transit signal priority projects for funding, which is the higher scoring and lower cost one that you see on the third line here.
Yeah, so I guess if we have to, stick to our 2 million, I think the process you used is certainly a good process. These are all generally low cost projects. And I think, especially given that we've, pushed off a lot of projects this year because of cost increase, we've, put a burden on a number of communities who were, expected to be in one tip year and pushed out to the next. We're not added at all in the 2026 tip. This program to me is a great way to show some good faith effort to the region with projects that are easily implemented and relatively low cost. We're proposing to do something similar with Boston and Columbus Ave for, which is a great project. Wasn't on the tip, but we're able to, use some funding to hopefully have a high impact project that'll be done in a short amount of time. And I think all these projects meet that criteria. I know we've been shifting some funding back and forth to make everything work. I really advocate that we look to see if we can fund some more of these community connections projects because I think that serves a better purpose than simply shifting funding from one year to the next to balance the books.
Daniel?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think I am in agreement or alignment with Jay in terms of it. It feels like a real shame that we can't fund a bit more of these projects since they are pretty low cost. I understand the concern about sort of how they're administered, but you know, I think yeah, like I said, it's kind of a shame that we wouldn't be able to, because I think there's quite a lot of interest in these kinds of like the micro transit projects and how they work and how they can work well. You know, it's something that Arlington is sort of thinking about or getting into or figuring out how that might work. So one, I guess, comment and a question, I think, you know, something that comes to mind with kind of going over these projects is I maybe this is more of an overall question for when we get to the bigger, I don't know, policy discussion about how we address the tip, but I feel like I wonder if there should be like another subcommittee that kind of looks more closely at these community connections projects as opposed to having the whole board kind of look at, you know, what feels like very small projects that could be looked at by a smaller group to advance to the MPO board. My question is, for these projects, I guess for TSP, the MBTA Salem Street TSP, I guess it would be a capital. Would that project or any of these other projects have to reapply next year for the community connections funds? They wouldn't be sort of put in the universe again for the next funding round?
Sure, I'm happy to take that. Sandy, feel free to jump in and correct me if I'm wrong. But so essentially, I think what we would do is, yeah, just put whatever projects you know are not awarded funding this year sort of back in the queue, and continue to work with them over the next year. Continue to work with our partners at MassDOT and at the T to understand you know, the administration side of these things and how to make that whole process work better. And so we wouldn't require, you know, that the proponents start from scratch on a new application, but we basically carry their application forward and then just ask them, you know, if they've changed their proposal or anything like that, then obviously, you know, we'd want to include those updates and, you know, and subsequently, you know, rescore the project with any changes. But we wouldn't, you know, require that folks start from square one.
Yeah, and in fact, we did do that for one project this year, the Watertown Shuttle. Initially applied last year, and they thought they were going to be able to launch, and there were COVID complications and funding complications, so they came back to us this year, and we rescored the project. Depending on how much we tweak the criteria, the scoring criteria between this year and next year, we may or may not go through the process of rescoring any carryover projects. But yeah, we won't require them to recreate the whole thing. In addition to which, specifically with regard to this project, I believe that the MBTA has mentioned they may have opportunity to fund it from other sources at some point. So they may not need to come back to us depending on what happens. I know there's a lot of uncertainty around, especially federal funding at this point.
All right, thanks.
Lynn Diggins?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I like that last couple of sentences from you, Sandy, Mr. Johnson. So a couple of questions. Well, first off, my comment to Jay and Dan is that I like a lot of the operations programs too, you know, but the constraint is that we can't fund these things for more than 3 years. And also the other thing is that we really need to figure out if they are meeting the air quality metrics. And so with that, I feel good about hesitating and waiting to fund these, you know, and I think I think to a certain extent, you may do the public a disservice. I mean, if you start something up, without a real commitment to sticking with it, because it's hard for people to then change their patterns of behavior if they are uncertain as to whether a project is going to go on. So with that as a preface, could these operations programs be funded through the transit modernization program? And if they could, would we be limited to the 3-year operating constraint?
So these projects are not MBTA funded projects. I guess the transit modernization program is a program wholly created by the MPO. So if the MPO chose to classify these as transit modernization, the MPO could fund these out of the transit modernization program. It is not, none of these are what the MPO originally defined the transit modernization program as.
Okay. Okay, that's good. I understand that. And to Mr. Johnson's comment about the 128 console. Yeah, I saw that after I had made that comment, and I get that. But there were some bike rack programs. I mean, along those lines. I mean, once again, if the MBTA has the wherewithal to fund it, then I would like to see the MBTA funded, especially if it's getting some extra monies. I mean, if not, then certainly let's fund it through here. But once again, if we can leave more money in the pot, for things that can't be funded elsewhere, let's do that. Thank you.
You're welcome. Jay Monty.
Sorry, my hand was up from last time. I'm all set.
Okay, Jillian.
Yeah, I just wanted to take a moment and respond to some of Len's comments. And I just want to, I guess, remind everyone that when these applications were submitted, the T was facing a much different situation. We had just allocated a bunch of capital dollars away from the CIP in order to support the operating budget. So I think a lot of these applications were intended to continue to support a lot of these smaller investments in the interim, recognizing that we were not in a good financial position. Obviously, that situation continues to evolve. So I think if there are concerns, I'd be happy to explain some of the values of these projects, but I would still stand by the value in advancing these projects sooner rather than later with the funds that are available from the MPO, because there's not necessarily a guarantee that even if funds are available at the MBTA in the coming months or whatnot, that these projects would be able to be advanced at the same rate that they are if they are programmed here today. So just, I'll put that out there, but happy to answer any other questions about some of the projects that were proposed or applied for by the T.
Thank you, Jillian. Other questions or comments? Tom Bent.
Is there, just wondering, is there any information on how any of these operations would be funded once the MPO funding stops?
Sandy?
Yeah, so we've received information. We asked proponents for the operating projects to submit detailed information on how the local fiscal commitment would work in year 4, because the MPO indicated when we were developing this program that its top priority basically for these operating projects was to ensure their fiscal viability beyond the 3 years of MPO funding. Because there's been past experience at this MPO with similar funding programs, putting money towards such projects, and then they do not, they've not been able to proceed past the end of the federal funding. So we can share that with the MPO at your request. I'd say we've received kind of varying information from different proponents. I don't think I could get it together like right this second to share with the full MPO. But essentially, we do ask the proponents to demonstrate that the operation will be able to stand on its own financial legs in year 4 once it stops receiving federal funding through the MPO. And if possible, to provide a letter of support from all of the private or other public sector partners who will be contributing funding to the operation.
Okay, Sandy, thanks.
Other questions or comments? So, Matt, go back to the previous slide, please. All right, so we need to decide.
Sorry. Sorry, which slide did you want me to go to?
The slide that we're now calling the staff recommendation for the $2 million.
Okay. Apologies.
Don't worry about it. There you go. So we need to decide now whether we want to adopt this recommendation or whether we want to add additional projects to this recommendation, delete projects from this recommendation and substitute projects. And then once we've figured that out, we can then figure out whether we can make it work with the cash flows so that you can accommodate more projects if you indeed want to do more projects. So does anybody have a preference? Is there a motion? Lynn Diggins.
With the satisfactory answers to my questions and for the purposes of getting, making some forward motion, I would like to make a motion that we accept the staff recommendations for community connections.
Thank you. Brian?
It's always a pleasure to second Lynn's motions.
Thank you. Motion having been made and seconded. Discussion. Seeing none, please call the roll.
Hey, David Moeller.
Yes.
John Bouchard. Okay, John Romano.
John Romano, yes.
Jillian
John
Linnell.
Bouchard, yes.
Oh, great, thank you. Jillian Linnell.
Jillian Linnell, yes.
Thank you. Eric Barassa.
Eric Barassa, yes.
Brian Kane.
Brian Kane, yes.
Leonard Diggins.
Leonard Diggins, yes.
Tom Kadzis.
Kadzis, yes. Thank you.
Jim Fitzgerald.
Yes.
Thank you. Jay Monty.
Jay Monty, yes.
David Kozis.
David Kozis, yes.
Daniel Amstutz.
Daniel Amstutz, yes.
Todd Corain.
Todd Corain, yes.
Tom Bent.
Tom Bent, yes.
Austin Saganowitz.
Austin Saganowitz, yes.
Thatcher Keyser.
Thatcher Keyser votes yes.
Darlene Nguyen.
Darlene Nguyen votes yes.
Tina Cassidy.
Tina Cassidy, yes.
Jennifer Constable.
Jennifer Constable, yes.
Peter Pelletier.
Peter Pelletier, yes.
And Tom O'Rourke.
Tom O'Rourke, yes.
Motion carries unanimously, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Jonathan. So now where we are in the process is we have the Community Connections program set for 2022. We have a proposal for an amendment for 21 to 25 that will shift the Green Line project, fund the Columbus Avenue project, and include all these community connections projects. Or actually, I think for the amendment, we will hold, because I'm trying not to overcomplicate the amendment. We will put the amendment out with just the $2 million line item, and then this will actually be reflected in the tip when we release the tip. So if that works with everybody, I need a motion today to, we're still going to talk about the tip after this motion because we have to figure out whether we want to fill the $20 million gap in 26 and if so, with what projects. But I would like to get an amendment, if possible, now to release a motion, I'm sorry, to release an amendment to the 2021 TIP that would make the changes discussed today. And that is the shifting of the GLX funding by year, the expediting the Ferry Street funding the bike path, the Columbus Avenue bike path, making the other changes as noted on the slide. And also I should note for the record that there has been a minor change to the project description of the Sumner Tunnel. We are no longer including jet fans in the project, so that's being taken out. So Brian Kane, can I get a motion?
Yeah, 2 quick points. I'm very happy to see that there's no jet fans at MassDOT, and it's the Columbus Avenue bus lane, not bike lane.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Very important to me. I so moved, Mr. Chairman.
Eric Barassa.
I second that motion.
Thank you. Motion having been made and seconded. Any comments or discussion? Seeing none, please call the roll.
David Moeller.
Yes.
John Bouchard.
John Bouchard, yes.
John Romano.
John Romano, yes.
Jillian Linnell.
Jillian Linnell, yes.
Eric Barassa.
Eric Barassa, yes.
Brian Kane.
Kane, yes.
Leonard Diggins.
Leonard Diggins, yes.
Tom Kadzis.
Kadzis, yes. Thank you.
Jim Fitzgerald.
Jim Fitz, yes.
Jay Monty.
Jay Monty, yes.
David Kozis.
David Kozis, yes.
Daniel Amstutz.
Daniel Amstutz, yes.
Todd Corain.
Todd Corain, yes.
Tom Bent.
Tom Bent, yes.
Austin Saganowitz.
Austin Saganowitz, yes.
Patrick Keyser.
Patrick Keyser votes yes.
Darlene Wynn.
Darlene Wynn votes yes.
Tina Cassidy.
Tina Cassidy votes yes.
Jennifer Constable.
Jennifer Constable, yes.
Peter Pelletier.
Peter Pelletier, yes.
And Tom O'Rourke.
Tom O'Rourke, yes.
Motion carries unanimous, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Jonathan. Now, Matt, can you put the scenario slide back up so we can talk about getting a motion to let you build a tip?
You mean this slide again?
There you go. So we've made our decision on community connections about what we funded in the tip. Then now we have to decide whether we want to program the $20.3 million that is available in 2026 for new projects. And if so, which new projects we'd like to program to fill that amount. Lynn Diggins.
I want to thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to reiterate my support of Mr. Barassa's thoughts that we not program the 20.6 million or 20.3 million in 2026. And I also have a request. And first off, a compliment. I think the scoring sheet for the new projects is just spectacular. I maybe am a little biased because I helped work with developing the new criteria, but it really helped in choosing. For me, if we were going to select between the two rail trail projects, one really popped out to me. But along those lines, I think we had agreed not to rescore some projects, but I would really love to see the McGrath highway project rescored so that I can see how it compares with the Lynn project. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn. Other questions or comments about this issue? Should we program 20.3 million or not? And Eric, can you take the chair for a minute? I got to take a call. Eric, go ahead and make your comment and then take the chair, can you?
Yes, I can do that.
I'll be right back.
Yeah, I can take the chair, and I'd like to, maybe I can just elaborate on sort of my perspective on 2026. I feel like, you know, I feel like we've had this robust discussion about cost increases and really understanding the implications of that. I think we should, you know, after we wrap up this tip cycle, we should have that policy conversation. And I also feel like, to Len's point, there's a lot of good projects out there. We've heard a tremendous amount of public input about 2 rail trails, but we haven't really allowed for a lot of robust public input about a lot of the other like projects in the long range plan. And arguably we should be prioritizing the long range plan projects first. But I think, because of the fact that we've moved so many projects into 26 and we don't have, I mean, we have more funding now, but not as much as we normally would. For all those reasons, I guess I would just feel more comfortable waiting. I also have always felt that the, you know, that the TIP is traditionally more a 4-year document. So 22, 23, 24, 25. We added the 5th year a few years ago. I've always felt like the 5th year is while we do commit to those projects now, it's less critical to program the 5th year than it is to really focus on the first 4 years. So those are kind of all the reasons why I am supporting not programming a new project in 2026. David, are you back?
Yeah, I'm actually back. Thank you very much. Other comments or questions?
Actually, Mr. Chair, can I just jump in with a clarification?
Yes.
Thank you. Just to Len's earlier point about the scoring. So we did score the McGrath Boulevard project in Somerville with the new criteria. So all the projects that we're looking at this year were all scored with the new criteria.
Thank you, Matt. Tom Bent.
Thank you. I was just going to say what Matt said. You know, McGrath had been rescored, but I also want to agree with Eric said about 2026. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thatcher Keyser.
Okay, sorry, moving unmute buttons. I just want to add, I think we should wait on the 2026. You know, as I understand the mechanisms of, you know, what's going on at the federal level and, you know, big dollars moving around. And, you know, right now we're all trying to figure out what the detailed criteria will be as different pots of money are rolling out. And I would much rather have a discussion about 2026 in knowing what all the possibilities are with whatever, you know, comes our way in regard to, you know, all the federal funding that's being proposed and kick around. I'd rather have that discussion, having a better idea of the totality of funds, so as not to, you know, shortchange a project that may be just shy of being able to be funded when there are, you know, other funds that will make it possible as we go through the process. So I also advocate holding in and waiting for that to play out.
Thank you. Others? Any other MPO members at this time? Seeing none, Ms. Teller, do you have something to comment on about a particular project? Because we're not really taking public comment, but if you have something you need to say, we will call on you. So I'll mute Emily Teller and let her make her comment.
Thank you. I just would like a clarification. You are trying to build the tip now, correct?
Yes.
Okay. I just have clarification. I'm one of the 2 rail trail proponents, not that there are 2 for this rail trail, but one of the 2 rail trails that you've been talking about. And on the tip that was released today for us to look at, there are still several projects that are recommended by Mass DOT to move out to a later tip, some to an earlier, one adjustment made for today. Will those change after your vote? In other words, will the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail be on the 2022 to 2026 tip after today?
So yes, so the answer to that question is what was ever published on scenario 5 stays where it is, with the exception of what's on the screen today, which is the changes we made today and the community connections programs. Okay. So if a particular project you or someone else cares about is currently programmed in a year, it's in the same year as it was in the draft scenario 5.
And will those highlighted colors change once the tip is finalized?
Well, yeah, well, the colors will go away. The tip, those colors are just so that the MPO, Matt has a very good color coordinated program that lets the MPO track via the colors what's happening to projects in relationship to where they were in the last tip. But yeah, all those colors will disappear.
Thank you. And thank you, Matt, very much for all your detailed work. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, any other questions from the MPO? Seeing none, can I get a motion to authorize staff to put together the tip document reflecting the scenario adjustments on the screen, all of the community connections programs that were decided in our last motion, and no programming of funds for new projects in 2026? Eric Barraza.
Mr. Chair, I will make that motion that you just discussed.
Thank you. Tom Bent.
And I would second that motion.
Thank you. Motion having been made and seconded. Jonathan, please call the roll.
David Moeller.
Yes.
John Bouchard.
John Bouchard, yes.
John Romano.
John Romano, yes.
Jillian Linnell.
Jillian Linnell, yes.
Eric Barraza.
Eric Barraza, yes.
Brian Kane.
Brian Kane, yes.
Leonard Diggins.
Leonard Diggins, yes.
Tom Kadzis.
Kaz is yes.
Jim Fitzgerald.
Jim Fitz, yes.
Jay Monty.
Jay Monty, yes.
David Kozis.
David Kozis, yes.
Daniel Amstutz.
Daniel Amstutz, yes.
Todd Corain.
Todd Corain, yes.
Tom Bent.
Tom Bent, yes.
Austin Siganowicz.
Austin Siganowicz, yes.
Patrick Keyser.
Patrick Keyser votes yes.
Darlene Nguyen.
Darlene Nguyen votes yes.
Tina Cassidy.
Tina Cassidy votes yes.
Jennifer Constable.
Jennifer Constable, yes.
Peter Pelletier.
Peter Pelletier, yes.
And Tom O'Rourke.
Tom O'Rourke, yes.
Motion carries unanimous, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Jonathan. Other items come before the MPO at this time? So I have one. We are, as everyone knows, going to appoint a subcommittee to tackle the issue of project cost changes, increases, and what that means for tip programming. So Eric and I will get together sometime probably next week, and finalize that subcommittee membership, and then we will announce it hopefully at the next meeting. So this is the last call. If you're interested in being considered and you haven't yet let us know, please send Tegan and I an email so we can make sure that your interest is included. Tom, you got something? Tom Bent?
Yeah, I was going to say I'd definitely be interested in being that, but I'll send Tegan an email.
Thank you. Any other issues come before the MPO at this time? Seeing none, thank you all very much. Can I get a motion and a second to adjourn? State your name for the record. Eric Barraza.
Eric Barraza makes a motion to adjourn.
Thank you. Lynn Diggins?
Second.
Thank you. Motion having been made and seconded. Without objection, we are adjourned. And great job, Matt Genova, on such short notice. Good job, everybody. Thank you for all your help.